My name is Gabriel Townsend. I am 36 years old, and I spend my life reading contracts for a living. I know how to spot a trapdoor in fine print. But nothing in my legal training prepared me for the silence that fell over the lobby of the Harbor Crown Hotel last Saturday night. I stood there in simple black attire, watching the champagne flow and the investors laugh. This wasn't just any hotel. It was the building my mother had pulled from the water, brick by rotting brick, when it was little more than a ruin. She had built this place with her own two hands. And tonight, she wasn't invited. Vivian, my stepmother, spotted me across the room. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. She signaled to the head of security, a man named Marcus who had worked here since before I was born. He approached me, his hand gentle but firm on my arm. "Miss Townsend," he said, his voice low. "This is a private event for partners and family. You're not on the list." I looked past him to Vivian. She was holding court near the bar, surrounded by the board members. She caught my eye and whispered something loud enough for the nearest investor to hear. "She's not family anymore," Vivian said, her voice crisp as glass. "Remove her." The air left the room. I looked at the wall behind them. Where the brass plaque used to hang, the one engraved with my mother's name and the motto built on the water, there was now a sleek chrome panel. The Hale Collection. EST 2014. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't ask for an explanation. I simply picked up my coat from the rack beside me. "I'll be outside," I said calmly. I walked out into the cool harbor air, leaving the laughter and the lies behind me. Have you ever been treated like a stranger in your own history? Drop a comment below. I want to know who else has kept receipts. Because today, I'm going to show you how one woman used silence as her weapon. And why being calm is the most dangerous thing you can do to someone who expects you to break. To understand why I walked out of that lobby without a word, you have to understand how they got in. It didn't happen overnight. It happened slowly, like water seeping into a foundation. You don't notice the dampness until the walls start to crack. 16 years ago, my mother, Diane Townsend, died. She had built the Harbor Crown from nothing. When she bought it in 1985, it was a leaking ruin with a dock nobody trusted. The bank laughed at her. So, she mortgaged everything twice. She painted rooms herself. She learned the boiler by hand. By the time I was old enough to walk the halls, the place ran like a watch. Senators booked the corner suites. Couples planned weddings 2 years out. And every evening at 6, the bell on the old harbor buoy rang across the water, low and steady. My mother would stop whatever she was doing just to listen to it. She put a brass plaque by the tall window in the lobby, the one that looked straight out at the dock. She had it engraved with one line, "Built on the water, kept by the people who mean it." I used to trace those letters with my finger while she worked. 3 years after the funeral, Vivian came. She was a hospitality consultant my father hired to modernize the brand. She was sharp, polished, and had a laugh she could turn on like a tap. Within a year, she was my stepmother. Within 2, she ran the place. I watched it happen from a distance. The way you watch weather move across a bay. First, the foundation. My mother had started the Diane Townsend Fund, a small thing that sent local kids to culinary school. Vivian quietly folded it into something called the Hale Family Initiative. Same money. New name. Then, the lobby. The brass plaque by the window came down 4 renovations and never went back up. Then, the brand itself. Harbor Crown became the Hale Collection. New logo. New stationery. A glossy website where the founder's story began somehow in the year my father remarried. And then there was Brooke, Vivian's daughter from her first marriage. 30 now. Given the title of creative director. An office on the top floor. Brooke had never poured a coffee in that hotel. She redesigned the napkins. I said something once, years ago, at a Thanksgiving I never should have attended. I asked gently why my mother's name was gone from the wall. Vivian set down her wine and looked at me like I'd tracked mud across her floor. "Diane's gone, Gabriel," she said, her voice almost kind. "This is the Hale era now." My father studied his plate. Brooke smirked into her napkin. "I drove home that night and didn't go back for 4 years. Until the gold invitation. Until I let myself believe a peace offering meant peace. I learned then that if you let someone paint over your past, they eventually convince themselves they were there all along. They don't just erase you. They replace you. And the worst part? You stand there and watch them do it because you're too tired to fight for a ghost." The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. Heavy cream cardstock. Gold lettering. The Harbor Crown's 40th anniversary gala. Hosted by Richard and Vivian Hale. My father's name was first. His wife's second. My mother's name? Nowhere on it. There was a handwritten line at the bottom in my father's shaky print: "We'd love for you to come, Gabby." A peace offering, I suppose. It was the first words he'd sent me in 4 years. I almost threw it away twice. What stopped me wasn't him. It was the address printed under the gold lettering. The Harbor Crown. The waterfront. The building my mother turned from a rotting inn into the finest hotel on the coast. I wasn't going for my father. I wasn't going for the wine or the speeches. I was going to stand in a room she made and remember that she once made it. I told myself I'd stay an hour. I didn't make it 20 minutes. After they ejected me, the cold off the water hit me like a slap. I gave the valet my ticket and stood at the edge of the circular drive, breathing. Out past the dock, the old buoy bell rang. 6 o'clock. The same low, steady note my mother used to stop and listen for. It didn't sound like comfort tonight. It sounded like a bell tolling for something already gone. "She's not family," Vivian had said. Like a fact. Like reading a temperature off a thermometer. And the worst part, the part that sat in my chest like a stone, was that for 16 years, I had let it become a fact. I'd let them take the plaque. I'd let them rename the fund. I'd let my mother's name slide off the building one quiet piece at a time. And I'd called my silence dignity. It wasn't dignity. It was surrender wearing a nicer coat. I didn't want revenge. I want to be clear about that. What came later wasn't rage. Standing in that cold, watching my breath fog, I felt something colder and steadier than anger. I felt awake. There was a box I had never opened. My mother's things. Sealed since the funeral. Sitting in a storage unit I paid for every month and never visited for 16 years. I told myself I wasn't ready. I was done not being ready. The valet pulled my car around. I tipped him, got in, and didn't drive home. I drove to the storage unit instead. At 11 o'clock at night, with the heater roaring and my hands steady on the wheel. It was time to find out what my mother had actually left me. Unit 114 smelled like dust and cold concrete. I hadn't been inside in 11 years. Most of it was furniture under sheets, a bicycle, tax records I should have shredded. In the back, on a shelf I'd put it on myself, was the cedar box. My mother had it made the year before she got sick. Tight-grained with the color of honey. A small brass latch. Her initials burned into the lid. She kept her important things in it. And after she died, my father handed it to me at the funeral and said, "This is yours. Just yours." I'd never opened it. 16 years. And I had never lifted the lid. I carried it to the front of the unit and set it on an overturned crate under the bare bulb. The latch was stiff. My hands, which had been so steady on the wheel, were not steady now. I want to tell you I opened it right away. I didn't. I sat on the cold floor with that box in my lap, and I cried for the first time in years. Not the polite tears of a funeral, but the ugly kind. The kind that come when you finally stop holding a door shut. When it passed, I wiped my face on my sleeve and put my thumb on the latch. And this time, my hand didn't shake, the latch gave with a small click. The lid lifted. On top, tucked into the inside of the lid, held by a thin elastic band gone brittle with age, was a business card. Cream stock. Navy lettering, Marion Webb. Independent trustee. Coastal Fiduciary Partners. Under it, in my mother's own handwriting, 3 words in blue ink, call her first. A trustee. My mother had retained an independent corporate trustee. That meant there was a trust. Not a will. Not a probate file my father could control. A trust with its own fiduciary. Separate from him entirely, I was a real estate lawyer sitting on a concrete floor at midnight, and my whole profession went very quiet and very alert. My mother didn't just leave money. She left control. And she waited for me to come looking for it. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. Heavy cream cardstock. Gold lettering. The Harbor Crown's 40th anniversary gala. Hosted by Richard and Vivian Hale, my father's name was first. His wife's second. My mother's name? Nowhere on it. There was a handwritten line at the bottom in my father's shaky print. We'd love for you to come, Gabby. A peace offering, I suppose. It was the first words he'd sent me in 4 years. I almost threw it away twice. What stopped me wasn't him. It was the address. The Harbor Crown. The building my mother turned from a rotting inn into the finest hotel on the coast. I wasn't going for my father. I was going to stand in a room she made and remember that she once made it. I told myself I'd stay an hour. I didn't make it 20 minutes. After they ejected me, the cold off the water hit me like a slap. Out past the dock, the old buoy bell rang. 6 o'clock. The same low, steady note my mother used to stop and listen for. It didn't sound like comfort tonight. It sounded like a bell tolling for something already gone. She's not family, Vivian had said. Like a fact, and the worst part, the part that sat in my chest like a stone, was that for 16 years, I had let it become a fact. I'd let them take the plaque. I'd let them rename the fund. I'd let my mother's name slide off the building one quiet piece at a time. And I'd called my silence dignity. It wasn't dignity. It was surrender wearing a nicer coat. I didn't want revenge. I want to be clear about that. What came later wasn't rage. Standing in that cold, watching my breath fog, I felt something colder and steadier than anger. I felt awake. There was a box I had never opened. My mother's things. Sealed since the funeral. Sitting in a storage unit I paid for every month and never visited for 16 years. I told myself I wasn't ready. I was done not being ready. The valet pulled my car around. I tipped him, got in, and didn't drive home. I drove to the storage unit instead. At 11 o'clock at night, with the heater roaring and my hands steady on the wheel. It was time to find out what my mother had actually left me. Unit 114 smelled like dust and cold concrete. In the back, on a shelf I'd put it on myself, was the cedar box. My mother had it made the year before she got sick. Tight-grained with the color of honey. A small brass latch. Her initials burned into the lid. She kept her important things in it. And after she died, my father handed it to me at the funeral and said, "This is yours. Just yours." I'd never opened it. 16 years. I carried it to the front of the unit and set it on an overturned crate. The latch was stiff. My hands, which had been so steady on the wheel, were not steady now. I sat on the cold floor with that box in my lap, and I cried for the first time in years. Not the polite tears of a funeral, but the ugly kind. The kind that come when you finally stop holding a door shut. When it passed, I wiped my face on my sleeve and put my thumb on the latch. And this time, my hand didn't shake. The latch gave with a small click. The lid lifted. On top, tucked into the inside of the lid, was a business card. Cream stock. Navy lettering, Marion Webb. Independent trustee. Coastal Fiduciary Partners. Under it, in my mother's own handwriting, 3 words in blue ink: call her first, a trustee. My mother had retained an independent corporate trustee. That meant there was a trust. Not a will. Not a probate file my father could control. A trust with its own fiduciary. Separate from him entirely, I was a real estate lawyer sitting on a concrete floor at midnight, and my whole profession went very quiet and very alert. My mother didn't just leave money. She left control. And she waited for me to come looking for it. I met Marion Webb the next morning in an office that smelled like paper and good coffee. She was 60, silver-haired, precise. On the table between us sat a single closed folder thick with my mother's name on the tab: Diane M. Townsend Family Trust. Your mother engaged my firm in 2007, Marion said. 2 years before she passed. She was very organized about it. People who build something from nothing usually are. Why the wait? I asked. You said as much on the phone. Marion opened the folder but kept her hand flat on the first page. Because the trust has a provision. Several actually. Your mother instructed that I not approach you, that I wait for you to come to me on your own. And there was a timing condition. She looked at me. You're 36 now. I turned 36 in October, then the condition is met. She paused. Your mother believed that if I came to you too early, the family would find a way to make it about the money. She wanted you to come on your own legs when you were ready to look. She used a phrase. She said she didn't want to hand her daughter a weapon. She wanted to hand her a choice. I sat very still. 16 years of believing the hotel had simply passed to my father. 16 years of letting them rename a fund and pull a plaque off a wall because I thought there was nothing of my mother's left to defend. Mrs. Webb, I said. What exactly is in that folder? She turned the first page. Almost everything you think your father owns, she said. She laid it out the way good fiduciaries do, slowly, in order, watching my face. The trust owned a holding company. Quiet. Single purpose. And that holding company owned a piece of real estate. Which property? I asked, though my stomach already knew. The land, Marion said. The waterfront parcel and the building on it. She turned a page. The Harbor Crown. I'd spent 14 years writing structures exactly like this one for my clients. Separate the bricks from the business, put the real estate in one entity, the operating company in another, and let the operating company lease the building from the property owner. Lawyers call it an OpCo/PropCo split. Rich families call it sleeping soundly. My mother had built the PropCo. My father's company was the OpCo. The Hale Collection doesn't own the hotel, I said slowly. It rents it, it leases it, Marion corrected. From a trust your father has been a co-trustee of on a strictly limited basis since your mother died. He has never owned the building, Gabriel. Or the land. Neither has his wife. I stopped breathing for a second. Vivian had been peeling my mother's name off a building my mother still owned. Brooke had redesigned napkins in a hotel her family merely rented. My father had let a guard put a hand on the rightful owner's arm and asked her not to make a scene. They had been rebranding a house that was never theirs. There's one more asset in the trust, Marion said. Beyond the land and the building. How much? She told me. I had to put my coffee down. $17 million. Held in the trust as reserve capital. Untouched. Growing quietly in conservative funds for 16 years, but the number wasn't what undid me. The letter was. Marion slid it across the table. Last in its own sealed envelope, my name on the front in blue ink. I recognized the slant of the G before I touched it. I opened it there with Marion politely studying the window. My mother's letter was not long. She was never long, Gabby, she wrote. If you're reading this, you found the box and you found Marion and you finally let yourself look. I know how long that took you. I know you, sweetheart, better than you think. I didn't build all of this so you'd be rich. I built it so no one could ever make you small again. A house in your name is a house no one can throw you out of. Don't fight them, sweetheart. Just stop renting them your silence. I read it 3 times. I folded it once along the crease she'd made, and I put it in my breast pocket where I could feel it against my chest. My mother hadn't been talking about Sal. She'd been talking about me. I made Marion walk me through every page slowly. Here is what my mother had done in plain terms. She placed the land and the building into the trust before she died. The trust leased both to the operating company, the one my father ran, on a long-term lease with modest rent. That lease is why nobody ever questioned it. The hotel operated. The rent got paid into the trust. On paper, everything looked like a family business humming along. But ownership of the bricks never moved. It sat in the trust the whole time. My father was named interim co-trustee alongside Marion's firm with deliberately narrow powers. He could approve operating decisions. He could not sell the property. He could not amend the trust. He could not remove the independent trustee. My mother had built a fence around him so high he apparently forgot it was a fence. And the successor, your mother named you sole successor trustee, Marion said. With full powers vesting on your 36th birthday. Until that date, the family's arrangement was protected. After that date, you have the unilateral right to assume sole control of the trust and everything it holds. The land. The building. The 17 million. I sat back in the chair. For 16 years, Vivian Hale had been peeling my mother's name off a building my mother still owned. Brooke had redesigned napkins in a hotel her family merely rented. My father had let a guard put a hand on the rightful owner's arm and asked her not to make a scene. They had been rebranding a house that was never theirs. And the lease said I could end it. By the time the sun came up, I'd made the decision. Not with anger. With the same calm I used to sign a closing, I called Marion at 8. I want to assume the trusteeship, I said. All of it. Tell me how we do this correctly so it holds up if they fight. They'll fight, she said. Let them, I replied. I read the lease. They didn't. I spent the next week doing what I do best, reading. I read the lease the way I'd read it for a stranger paying me $400 an hour. And on the 4th night, in the dense back pages where people stopped paying attention, I found it. A covenant. My mother, careful even about the things she loved, had written protection for her own name into the lease itself. The operating company was permitted to run the hotel, but it agreed to preserve and maintain the Harbor Crown name, the founder's commemorative plaque, and the Diane Townsend Fund as standing features of the property. Any rebranding required the property owner's written consent. The property owner being the trust. The trust being now me. Vivian had not asked the trust for consent. Of course she hadn't. She didn't know the trust existed. The Hale Collection rebrand was a breach. Folding the Diane Townsend Fund into the Hale Family Initiative was a breach. Taking the plaque off the wall and shoving it into fourth-floor storage was, in the literal language of a contract my mother wrote on her deathbed. A breach. Diane's gone, Vivian had told me 4 years ago over wine. This is the Hale era now. It turned out my mother had reached out of the grave and written in advance the exact clause that made the Hale era illegal. I sat with that for a long moment. Not gloating. Just quietly amazed at the woman who raised me, who had seen all of this coming and built the trap so gently that no one noticed they were standing in it. Then Marian called with the part that set the clock ticking. The Hale Collection is refinancing, she said. A large commercial loan still in underwriting, set to close in about 3 weeks. They're using it to fund an expansion. And the collateral. The loan application represents that the borrower owns the Harbor Crown real estate. The land and the building are listed as the primary asset securing the debt. I closed my eyes. The whole gala. The champagne tower. The investors. The reporter. The speeches about the bright future of the Hale Collection. It hadn't been vanity. It had been a sales pitch. They were dressing up the company to borrow against a building they didn't own. They're pledging my mother's property to a bank, I said. As if it's theirs. They believe it is theirs, Marian said. That's the charitable reading. And the uncharitable one? That somewhere in that company, someone knows about the trust and is hoping you never look in the box. I thought about the business card placed deliberately at the top of the cedar box, where I'd see it first. I thought about my mother's certainty that someone would offer my father peace at my expense. 3 weeks. That was the window. If the loan closed against that collateral, untangling it would take years and lawyers and a courtroom, and the harm would already be done. But if I assumed the trusteeship before it closed, cleanly, on the record, the truth would simply be the truth. No courtroom required. I had 3 weeks to stop being silent. People expect this part to be dramatic. It wasn't. That's exactly why it worked. There was no dumpster fire. No shouting match. No clever speech rehearsed in a mirror. There was paperwork. And I am very, very good at paperwork. Marian and I built the file together over 4 days. An acceptance of trusteeship. A notice to the existing co-trustee, my father, that his interim role was ending by the trust's own terms. A certification of trust. And a folder of clean evidence, the deed, the lease, the rent ledger, the photographs of the breach. Everything correct. Everything dated. Everything done the way it would have to survive a hostile lawyer reading it line by line, looking for the trapdoor. The way I would. You understand what happens when we serve this? Marian said on the last evening, sliding the signature pages across the table. I assume sole control of the trust, I said. The land. The building. The reserve. And the lease. As property owner, she said, you'll have standing to enforce its terms. Including the breach. Including, if you choose, termination for cause, termination for cause. I rolled the phrase around. My mother had given me a key. And the key happened to fit the front door of the house they'd thrown me out of. I signed nothing that night. Not yet. I wanted to do one thing first. The kind of thing that doesn't show up in any file. I wanted to stand in the lobby one more time, after hours, with no champagne tower and no Vivian, and decide for certain what kind of person I was going to be when this was over. So, I called Sal. Before I could get to him, the company got to me. A courier reached my office at 4 on a Thursday with a thick envelope. The return address was a law firm I knew by reputation. Inside was a cease and desist letter, 3 pages, signed by Gregory Pace, general counsel for the Hale collection, so they'd found out I'd been asking Marion's firm questions. Someone had panicked. So, they'd found out I'd been asking Marion's firm questions. Someone had panicked. I read it twice. It was aggressive and confident and, in places, almost insulting. It accused me of harassing the company's fiduciary partners and attempting to interfere with a legitimate family business. It demanded I cease all inquiries into matters that do not concern me. Then came the part that was supposed to end the conversation. Pace claimed the trust had been amended. He attached a document titled First Amendment to the Diane M. Townsend Family Trust, removing me as successor and naming my father as sole trustee with full powers, including the power to sell. It was dated 11 years ago. It bore my father's signature. If that amendment were real, I'd just lost everything before I started. I felt the floor tilt for exactly one breath. Then the lawyer in me woke up. The one who reads the dense back pages. And I started looking at the document instead of fearing it, because Gregory Pace had made one mistake. The mistake confident people make. He'd assumed I'd be too shocked to read carefully. He had sent a forgery to a forensic real estate attorney and called it leverage. I poured myself a glass of water, sat down, and read the amendment the way I read everything, line by line, looking for the trapdoor. It took me about 90 seconds to find 3. The first problem was the trust itself. My mother's trust became irrevocable on the day she died. Irrevocable means exactly what it sounds like. No one can amend it after that. Not my father. Not Pace. Not anyone. The document was dated 11 years ago. My mother had been gone 5 years by then. You cannot amend a trust on behalf of a woman in the ground. The second problem was consent. Even a valid amendment to this trust required the written consent of the independent trustee. There was no signature from Marion's firm anywhere on the page. None had ever been requested. The third problem was smaller and somehow the worst. The amendment referred to the Diane Townsend Foundation. My mother never used the word foundation. It was the fund. Whoever drafted this had copied the name off Vivian's rebranding, off the Hale Family Initiative paperwork, and never checked the original. A forger who doesn't know the dead woman's own words is a forger who wasn't there. Here's the thing nobody told Gregory Pace: I read trust documents for a living. He sent a fabrication to the one person on earth most likely to take it apart. And he did it because years ago, this family decided who I was and never updated the file. If you've ever been underestimated by people who stopped paying attention to you, you already know how this feels. And you know it's a gift. I called Marion and read her the 3 problems. She was silent for a moment. Gabrielle, she said, do you understand what they just did? They handed me proof of intent, I said. They handed you a courtroom, she said. If you want one. I did not want a courtroom. I wanted the lobby. By midnight, they were at my door. The knock came at 12:10. Then the buzzer, held down, insistent. I looked through the peephole and saw all 3 of them crowded into the hallway of my building. Vivian in a coat she'd clearly thrown over whatever she'd been wearing. My father, gray and shaking. Brooke filming on her phone before I'd even opened the door. I considered not answering. But I'd spent 16 years not answering doors. And look where that got me. I opened it. You don't get to do this, Vivian said, pushing forward before the door was fully open. You don't get to crawl back after 16 years and steal what we built. I didn't steal anything, I said. My voice came out level. Almost soft. It surprised even me. Come in. You're letting the cold in. That threw her. She'd come for a fight, and I'd offered her a chair. They filed into my small kitchen. The deed was still on the table from earlier. Vivian's eyes went to it and away fast, like it burned. the bank pulled the loan, my father said. His hands wouldn't stay still. 40 million gone. They're saying we don't own the building, Gabby. That's not possible. I've run that hotel for 16 years, you've run it? I agreed. You never owned it. Mom did. Now I do, this is fraud, Vivian snapped. We'll have lawyers, you already sent one, I said. I slid the forged amendment across the table, toward her. Gregory Pace. He sent me this. A trust amendment dated 5 years after Mom died. With no independent trustee consent. Naming a foundation Mom never called a foundation. I looked at her. It's not even a good forgery, Vivian. It's just a confession with a signature line. The kitchen went very quiet. Brooke lowered her phone. My father stared at the document, and I watched him understand finally what he'd signed 11 years ago in some conference room while Vivian's people told him everything was fine. I didn't know, he whispered. Vivian. I didn't. Shut up, Richard, she said, and that, more than anything, told the whole room who had built the Hale era. It was never my father. He just rented them his silence. The same as me. The difference was, I'd stopped. Vivian recovered fast. People like her always do. Fine, she straightened her coat. Gathering the old confidence. You own the bricks. Congratulations. But the business is ours. The brand. The bookings. The staff. The Hale collection is worth nothing without the company that runs it. So, you'll lease it to us, and you'll be reasonable. Because an empty hotel earns you nothing, she found the one piece of leverage she had left and reached for it. She didn't know I'd already used the lease against her. There's no lease to negotiate, I said. There's a lease in default. You breached it the day you took my mother's name off that building without the owner's consent. I sent the notice this morning. The lender has a copy. So does the board. The board? Her voice thinned. You contacted the board. As the property owner, I'm required to. I kept it factual, almost boring, because boring was the most devastating register I had. Every member who stood at that window watching you have me removed received the same packet I sent the bank. The deed. The lease. The default. The forged amendment your counsel was kind enough to put in writing. I watched it land. Not in her, she was past landing, but in my father, who sank into a kitchen chair like his legs had quit. The investors from the gala, he said hollowly. They've been calling me all night. They thought we owned it. Gabby, they invested because they thought, because Vivian told them a story, I said. I just sent them the documents. The reporter from the Business Journal had been at that gala, too. By morning, the story would not be the bright future of the Hale collection. The story would be that a coastal hotel had tried to borrow $40 million against a building it didn't own, and the real owner had quietly, legally put a stop to it before the wire cleared. No scene. No shouting from me, anyway. Just the truth, sent to the same room that had watched me get thrown out, arriving in envelopes instead of accusations. Vivian turned to me, and the honey was entirely gone. You did this on purpose, she hissed. All of it. To humiliate us. No, I meant it. You did the humiliating. I just stopped paying for it, that was when she broke. Not into apology. People like Vivian never apologize. But into the full performance. The one she'd probably used to get everything she'd ever taken. Her eyes filled on command. Her voice cracked. You have no idea what I went through, she said. Your father was a wreck when I met him. I held this family together. I built that brand from a tired old hotel with a dead woman's name on it. I earned this. And you? You abandoned all of us for 16 years, and now you sweep in, and Vivian, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. The deed was on the table between us, and it did all the shouting either of us would ever need. You called my mother a dead woman in my kitchen, in front of her daughter, while standing in a building she still owns. Vivian's mouth closed. I stood up. Not fast. Not angry. I just stood, because some things you say on your feet, at your gala, I said, you told a guard to remove me. You said I wasn't family. Do you remember? She didn't answer. She remembered. You were right, I said quietly. I'm not family. I'm the landlord. The word filled the small kitchen like cold air off the harbor. You can keep your name, I went on. Stay Vivian Hale. Run whatever company you can run somewhere else. But you will not keep my mother's. Her name goes back on that wall. The fund goes back to her. The Hale era ends with this signature, the same way it should have ended 16 years ago. My father made a small, broken sound. Brooke had stopped filming entirely. I held the door open. You came to my home at midnight to tell me I couldn't do this, I said. I already did it this morning, before lunch. Quietly. The way my mother taught me. I had not made a scene. I had simply, after 16 years, stopped renting them my silence. They left. Vivian first. Then Brooke. My father lingered in the doorway, searching for something to say, and found nothing worth keeping. The fallout was quieter than you'd expect, and far more total. The loan never closed. The lender, once it had the trust documents, would not wire $40 million against collateral the borrower didn't own. The expansion died on the table. Without it, and with a notice of default hanging over the lease, the operating company had no future running my mother's hotel. I gave them a choice because my mother's letter asked me to. They could negotiate a fair market rate lease with the name, the fund, and the plaque restored under terms I controlled, or they could walk away and let me bring in an operator who would. Vivian couldn't stomach being a tenant in the building she'd tried to own. She walked. So did Brooke and her napkins. Gregory Pace resigned within the month. The forged amendment was a quiet problem he'd be explaining to a licensing board for some time. My father stayed on in a small honorary role I created for him, because he was still my father, and because my mother had told me not to hate him. 2 weeks later, I stood in the lobby of the Harbor Crown by the tall window that looks out at the dock. The chrome panel was gone. In its place hung my mother's plaque, the brass cleaned and recast, the letters catching the light again, built on the water, kept by the people who mean it. I'd had it remounted exactly where she put it, a few inches lower so a child could trace the letters. Sal stood beside me, hands folded, the way he used to stand beside her. She'd have liked that, he said. You doing it without shouting. She wrote it that way, I said, out past the dock. In the late afternoon, the buoy bell rang. This time it didn't sound like a death knell or a roll call. It sounded like a homecoming. I didn't burn their lives down. I want you to know that, because I think it matters. I could have. The forged amendment alone could have ended careers and started lawsuits that ran for years. There was a version of this story where I left Vivian with nothing. I chose a different one. They kept their personal money, their cars, their house. I didn't touch a dollar that was actually theirs. What I took back was only ever my mother's. The land. The building. The 17 million. And her name on a wall. People ask if I forgave them. That's the wrong question. And it took me 16 years and one cedar box to learn the right one. The boundary isn't built on forgiveness or grudge. It's built on a deed and a name and a wall. On knowing exactly what is mine and refusing ever again to pretend it isn't. Because here's the only thing I really learned: what's built on someone else's silence only stands until the day they finally decide to stop being silent. That's my story. One signature. One name back on a wall. If a family ever made you doubt your own history, go open the box you've been avoiding. You might own more than they let you believe. What is one boundary you need to protect today? Write it down. Keep it close. The rest will quietly follow you. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.